Okay, so this was once known as the best album ever, the greatest album of all time. Abby Hoffman, 20 years after the fact, said he can remember 2 days clearly out of his whole life. He remembers the time he heard that President Kennedy got killed. He remembers the first time he heard Sergeant Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band. So, but for me, I came late to the party. I never even heard of this album until the Bee Gees remade it and made a movie. And the first two songs were on the radio repeatedly. And I hated the Bee Gees just on principle. I didn't realize they'd been around since this album was made. They'd been a band making a living at it. And also Denny Lane, who later was an integral part of Wings, was pretty successful as a solo artist during this year, 1967. But it opened my mind enough that when a friend got the Red and Blue albums and played them for me, I was willing to listen. I liked it so much that this is the first Beatles album I ever bought. And, you know, 10 years after it was made, so, but more recently, I've listened to it on CD and on download and streaming, and I've been wondering why I liked it so much back then. And in listening to this, in preparation for this, I realized that it loses a lot if you're not listening to it on album. A few years back, there was some advertisements that said that the preferred format for this, for the Beatles, was the mono version, which I've heard it on download in earphones, and I don't see what the big deal is. But now this is just amazing. Even though my speakers on my record player are so close together, in order to hear it in stereo, I had to sit and put my head up against it with the speakers by either ear in order to get the stereo effect. And supposedly, Paul and George did not like stereo. I've heard them in interviews speak out against not liking stereo, but they used it a lot in this. There are a lot of tracks where there'll be a voice in one speaker and it'll move to the middle, or it might move just a little from the middle to just left of the middle, and then all the way to the left. Lots of that. They play around a lot with stereo, a lot on this. Maybe John was the one who liked the stereo. But anyway, let's go through the tracks. And while we're at it, I'll show you some of the goodies. Comes with like this and this. And this thing. If you've got it, you've probably already seen these. So it starts off with the title track, Sergeant Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band. And then that's sung by, starting with Paul and goes to John. And it uses guitar a lot in a frequency that I thought was cool when I first heard it. But when I got into my 40s, I found that frequency annoying. But maybe it's only annoying on CD and digital, because it didn't bother me now when I was listening to it. So Sergeant Pepper, John and Paul. That's followed by With Little Help from My Friends, sung by Ringo. And then Lucy in the Sky with Diamonds, which Timothy Leary says as a message: tune in, turn on, and drop out. That's sung by John. And then Getting Better. Now, that's sung by Paul, and when I first heard it on CD, I was really upset because, I've memorized it, I played it over and over again back in the 70s, and there's like a whole measure just before, I used to be cruel to my woman, I'd beat her, and that just before that, there's a measure with sitar and guitar playing a chord, and that was missing in the version I heard on CD. Paul, another Paul song, Fixing a Hole, and then another Paul song, She's Leaving Home. I say it's a Paul song, but the others are doing harmony singing throughout this. And then a John song, Being for the Benefit of Mr. Kite. A very trippy, hallucinogenic song. Let's look at the side B. So the back has all the words on it, which was a revolutionary thing at the time. And it starts off with a George's song, Within You, Without You. And that's followed by Paul singing When I'm 64. And then another Paul song, Lovely Rita. And a John song, Good Morning, Good Morning. Now, there was some controversy about this song because supposedly he copied dog barking from the Beach Boys song Pet Sounds. So when I heard Pet Sounds, I was really disappointed because I had to listen to it multiple times very carefully before I could hear any dog barking on that album. So, and it's very prominent in this song. Okay, so let's follow up by a reprise of Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band, a more hard-rocking version than the original there. And finally, A Day in the Life, which is really awesome on album. There's this bit just after Paul where John's face going, ah, and the voice starts in the right speaker and it gradually moves over to the left speaker and then back to the right, and then when he sings again it suddenly jumps to the left. It's it was a long time before I noticed that. When I did, I was like blown away, and it doesn't sound as good on CD and download and streaming. So yeah, you really need to hear it on album to hear this album. You have to hear it on LP. It's much better. This LP I would give as a refutation to the people who claim that digital sounds better. Yeah, when CDs first came out, we had a bunch of old scratched up records, and yeah, a brand new CD sounded better than our old scratched up record. But it doesn't sound better than a new record on a top in stereo. And even something as magnificent as this, it sounds better with a record player with the speakers next to each other than it does on CD. Even though you can hear it more clearly on CD, just the warmth is just not there. So, highly recommend Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band. I will say, the oldies station plays music from 40 years ago. That's been consistent. But for some reason, they skipped over 1967. There was a lot of weird hallucinogenic stuff that they don't play. They play the more conventional sounding stuff, and so they hardly play anything from this album. Because it's the Beatles, they play more of this than they do, for example, Pink Floyd from that year. I did hear Interstellar Overdrive's introduction on the Doctor Strange movie, so maybe things are changing. There's another YouTube channel called Yesterday's Papers, and they do a bunch of retrospectives on singles from a particular month, and they've done all of 1967. And people talk about how revolutionary this album was, but when I hear all the British singles that failed to chart or were just not known outside of Britain, that I hear on Yesterday's Papers, I realized, when not just listening to their YouTube thing, but making a list of them and listening to the complete songs made me realize that the Beatles were not revolutionary with this album. They were in tune with the times. They were in tune with what was going on in Britain that year, and they had a much bigger budget to do it with. Now, it was supposed to be a double album, but the record company cut them off because they thought it was too expensive. And so, yeah, some of the songs that should have been on it ended up on Magical Mystery Tour, or Yellow Submarine. Only a Northern Song was supposed to be on there. And Strawberry Fields and Penny Lane were recorded as part of the Sgt. Pepper recordings. So, yeah, should have been a double album. I don't know if being a double album would have improved it or not. But they were really in the groove. They were really working together. But afterwards, George said he hated this album. He hated the process of recording one track and then going up and doing it again. And they did this with a 4-track recorder. It's really amazing they were able to do this. So check it out.